There are a lot of myths in trucking. For instance, some people believe that you can properly check the air pressure of a truck tire by thumping it with a billy club. However, any tire maker will tell you today's radial truck tires must be checked with a tire pressure gauge. The danger of doing otherwise is having a roadside tire emergency. When it comes to weigh station bypass, there are also myths, and if you believe in them, they're costing you time and money. This is the Eyes on the Road podcast. I'm Evan Lockridge, and it's good to have you here. What if I told you it's possible to save time, money, and fuel each time you or one of your trucks legally bypasses a weigh station? Now, don't take my word for it, but rather this is according to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. Back in 2007, the agency released a study that found the average savings of each weigh station bypass saved truckers an average of 5 minutes and more than $8.50 in terms of fuel costs and truck wear and tear. Now, keep in mind this study was conducted when the average U.S. cost of diesel was between $2.50 to $3 per gallon, much less than it has been in 2022. In other words, with higher fuel prices, not to mention higher costs on maintaining trucks, the savings are no doubt even greater than what was in this study from 15 years ago. Today, hundreds of thousands of trucks are enrolled in weigh station bypass service. However, some are not, and many of the reasons center on myths that both drivers and fleets have about the service. Joining me now to bust some of these myths by phone is Terry Maple. He spent more than 30 years in law enforcement, including with commercial vehicle enforcement. Has been with PrePass the past 8 years as a regional director for mainly the Midwest. Terry, thanks for being on Eyes on the Road.
Evan, glad to be with you and your listeners.
Well, to begin with, in your opinion, what do you think are some of the most common myths about weigh station bypass service?
Well, a lot of it revolves around driver information, personally identifiable information of drivers and what's tracked by bypass companies and those type of things. Some of the common things are that bypass program tracks me from here to there. They do enforcement related to hours of service and things based on what a bypass service provides, and that's simply not the case.
Now, Terry, you and I, along with some other people at PrePass, put together a list of the most common myths we had heard from truck drivers and fleet managers about weigh station bypass. And one of those items that topped the list is the belief that if a motor carrier participates in a weigh station bypass program, that they receive more truck inspections. But of course, that's not true, is it?
No, actually, the bypass programs are used by law enforcement to reward carriers with good safety ratings, and they all do just that. One of the things that the states up front, each state sets their own bypass screening criteria that all bypass providers have to comply with. So it's not something that a bypass provider does on their own. They do it at the direction of the state enforcement entity that they're working with. And one of the common misconceptions is that CSA scores are used to determine bypass rates, and that's really not accurate. The 7 basics of the CSA program are, all combined into one score called the inspection selection score, and typically that's what bypass providers utilize to screen and determine pull-in rates for carriers of various safety levels.
Well, then what can a motor carrier do to positively affect their inspection selection system score so they increase their chances of receiving bypasses at weigh stations?
Well, one of the things they can do with one is pay attention to your safety, but two, typically those across those basics, they're all combined with other carriers of similarly situated carriers that allows the FMCSA to come up with that combined score. And when the pull-in rates, look at that, the inspections actually help. Good inspections actually help lower that ISS score. So, when a carrier's pulled in and reviewed and inspected, just have your drivers and stuff, make sure they have their stuff together, be professional and work with the enforcement entity that's completing the inspection and make sure they're doing everything right. And simple as that, if a carrier does a lot of those things and make sure they're up to date on their credentials and everything, ultimately that will help lower the ISS score.
Well, let's talk about another myth when it comes to weigh station bypass, and that is customers who use weigh station bypass are charged a fee each time one of their trucks bypasses a scale, Terry.
Well, that's another myth, obviously, that is not correct. PrePass, the users pay a monthly flat fee for the bypass service. Value comes to those carriers that are passing a lot of inspection stations, and then there's the benefit of that good ISS score again. Having a lower one is a lower pull-in rate.
That's a good point. Now, one myth I seem to be running across a lot lately is that weigh station bypass only works with a transponder in the truck.
Well, again, that used to be the case. Today's world, there are different ways to do that, and PrePass offers a couple different ways to do that. You can use the transponder-based system, which a lot of our customers opt for. We also have the PrePass app that is a cellular-based program that works, and the differences between them, actually those two systems are integrated. And the PrePass system will know, even if you have both of them, which one you're operating on and advise you accordingly. The app offers a lot of different things like telematics integration. We have agreements with various telematics providers, including OmniTrax, Geotab, Garmin, Pedigree, and we're working on others that the PrePass app is offered through. So, users have a couple ways to do that and don't have to rely solely on a transponder anymore. And in some states, there are some app-only bypass sites that don't have the transponder infrastructure. So, when you combine those two, you get more bypass opportunities with PrePass.
Now, over the years of talking to truck drivers, I realize some have big concerns about how their personal information is used in the trucking industry. One of these concerns is that some believe that weigh station bypass is used to track their movements even when they're off duty, that data is shared with the government, or that bypass programs can be used by law enforcement to issue tickets for moving violations.
Well, that again, Evan, is a myth that we work with routinely, and that thought is out there. But one of the things that PrePass does not do is we don't date timestamp transactions, nor do we capture personally identifiable information from drivers. We capture things like the ISS score, the license plate, the VIN, the DOT number, their IRP, IFTA, UCR, those kind of things, credential-based, but we don't capture driver information. And even with all of the other things, the only time the system sees you is when you bypass a facility. So we don't see you before that, and we don't see you after you leave that facility.
What about logbook violations? I realize most logbooks have been replaced by electronic logging devices, but can drivers be issued citations for such violations based on their weigh station bypass activity?
Well, one of the things that we do to help with that protection of our users' privacy is we limit what enforcement can see to sites within their state. And they can look at sites within their respective states. But again, we don't have the date, time stamp that's on things at the weigh station that the enforcement officers can see. They know how far, obviously, it is between stations in their state, and they may ask a driver some questions that they could put together things to possibly take enforcement action on, but it is not readily available through the PrePass system.
Now, Terry, I mentioned earlier you're a regional director for PrePass in the midsection of the country. One of your counterparts who covers the country a little further to the east told me recently that one myth he runs across is that if a weigh station bypass customer passes a scale house that's closed, that's going to count against that carrier's inspection selection system score.
Well, again, that transaction information clearly shows up as the site was closed when it happens. And again, it's not we don't share that. That's part of the data that's protected by our privacy policies. We don't share that information with enforcement entities or the government in any fashion unless under a subpoena or something along that line.
Now, Terry, you've been with PrePass about 8 years, and before that, you spent more than 3 decades in law enforcement. During that time as a law enforcement officer, what's the most prevalent myth you heard from people in trucking when it came to way station bypass?
Probably the most prevalent is the part that the providers provide a whole bunch of information to enforcement and related to hours of service, medical conditions, driver qualifications, those kind of things. And really, Evan, those are not screened by bypass providers.
Terry Maple, a regional director with PrePass. Terry, thanks very much.
Well, I appreciate it, Evan, and hopefully that clears up some of those myths that your listeners have heard.
It does very much. Now, you can learn more facts about how PrePass Way Station Bypass works with either a transponder, an app, or both. Simply go to the PrePass website at PrePass.com. There you can also listen to previous episodes of this podcast, read the PrePass blog to learn the latest about trucking industry developments, including new regulations, as well as read white papers on how to save time and money with your trucking operation. Once again, that's at PrePass.com. I'm Evan Lockridge. Thank you for listening, and remember to keep your eyes on the road.